Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. I'm excited to conclude our conversation with Elder Adam Stokes today. He's an apostle with the Church of Jesus Christ, the Assured Way. And this time we're going to find out that he's a little bit of a Heartlander. We're going to combine some of his biblical and Book of Mormon scholarship as we talk in this final conversation. You won't want to miss it. Check it out.
Well, let me ask you this, because I read this today from Egypt to Ohio, and I know you've got the picture right behind your head there. I think that's the same cover, right?
Yeah.
And so, because the subtitle is A Semitic Origin for the Giants of North America. Let's talk about that, because I know you talk about Goliath, and I just talked with Trevin Hatch recently about Goliath.
Yeah.
Well, and this is another thing, because you even told how tall you were in this book.
Yeah, I'm only 5'4". I'm short.
Okay, and I'm 6'4". So
Okay.
Am I a giant?
I think in the ancient, in a pre-modern context, I think in the 1700s you would have been.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I guess I can get behind that a little bit if we're talking about, giants, because I know Trevin said, well, and I'm curious about this. Sometimes I read too fast and I don't maintain, so this is why it's good to ask questions. But because Trevin Hatch, we were talking about how tall Jesus was, and he agreed with you that Jesus was probably 5'2", 5'4", pretty short. For our modern day, but that was average back in Jesus's day, and that Goliath was probably 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And if we were to stand next to each other, I'm a foot taller than you, and so I guess you could claim that I'm a giant. But I'm that makes a lot more sense than a 9-foot giant, because basically Trevin said that story got embellished over time, and so Goliath went from 6.5 feet to 9 feet tall. Would you agree with that interpretation, first of all?
No, I think Goliath was huge, and I think that he came from if you look at the larger biblical tradition, he came from a race of people, from a group of people who were above normal human stature. So I argue, and this kind of goes back to thinking that humanity has kind of de-evolved. I think that if you look at the earliest biblical traditions, there were these giants, these Rapha, Gigantes in the Latin and Greek, if you want to call them that, who were around, and they were of extraordinarily high stature, and they seem to have a very sophisticated culture, which is basically what I argue in From Egypt to Ohio. So
you think Goliath was 9 feet tall?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Okay, because it seemed like you did reference that some of the early traditions said he was shorter.
He's shorter than some of the other giants that we have mentioned in the Bible.
Okay, because I thought you had said he was 6.5 feet tall.
Everybody talks about Goliath, but Goliath is kind of on the short end compared to some others. So there's an Egyptian giant that's defeated by the Israelites, and he was pretty tall, at least 10 feet. 11 feet or so. So, and the Nephilim, however we interpret that term, the fallen ones, they seem to have been pretty tall as well. So,
okay, so you're taking a lot of these, what most scholars would say would be legends, and saying that they're literal.
Yeah, I think that there's a history. So, I know this seems like I'm trying to balance out two different views, and maybe I am. But I don't think one of the things that I would criticize biblical scholarship about is not taking the Bible literally enough. And that comes from biblical scholarship's roots. So people like Hermann Gunkel, German biblical scholar, is one of the founding fathers of biblical scholarship. One of the big things that German biblical scholars did was to argue that Bible was basically metaphor, that it was etiological, that these were mythical stories meant to explain things. They weren't meant to be taken literally. And I don't think that takes the Bible, in my opinion, that doesn't take the Bible seriously enough. So I do think, remember, this is the ancient world. People are only going to write down what they think is of utmost importance, what they think actually happened. However, we may interpret, what their worldview was like. But I think that a lot of times when the biblical scholars, not biblical scholars, when the biblical authors wrote stuff down, they were writing what they perceived to be what actually happened. Now, do they embellish it sometimes? Yes, and that draws a tricky line into what's embellishment, what's not. That can apply to the giants as well. But I think that in a lot of cases, this wasn't just metaphor. This wasn't just an etiological story explaining how something came to be. It was what happened. So for myself, a lot of the biblical stories for me, they have a historical root. And this is the case with a lot of mythology, with a lot of stuff that we deem mythology in modern times. So if you look at the classical stories, for example, for many years, up until Shimon, we didn't believe that the Trojan War actually happened. He uncovers Troy, he finds Troy, and now we know the Trojan War actually happened. So again, apart from their own kind of worldview and their cosmology, I think that historically these stories are telling stuff that actually happened. And that these traditions of giants, at least in my view, go back to something that's historical. So hence, again, my view why I think we're kind of de-evolving rather than evolving. So.
Because I'm trying to remember, I don't have the reference off the top of my head, but somewhere, I believe it's in Genesis, it says that the sons of God and the daughters of men
just
or something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so in our modern lens, we're like, that doesn't really make sense. So how would you explain that? Because it sounds like we've got humans and non-humans mating with each other, which sounds very Greco-Roman
it depends on how
Hercules.
How you translate how you understand Nephilim. So Nephilim are usually taken, traditionally they've been taken as spiritual beings, kind of fall into the earth. There's a whole ancient aliens type of subplot to this. So Von Daniken and people say that the Nephilim were remnants of this crashed spaceship that came and mated with humans. So in that case, it would be something, supernatural or paranormal, mating with, human beings, interacting with the natural world. I just tend to view these, the Nephilim as above average stature. So these giant.
I mean, could we argue it's like Neanderthals and Homo sapiens getting together? Maybe.
Yeah. That's how I would take it.
I mean, that would make more sense to me than.
That's how I would take it. Yeah.
So, because I think there is a little bit of a height difference there between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals.
There is, yeah. And especially when you get to, my friend Greg Little talks about this, and Andrew Collins, the Denisovans, for example, they were considered giants in their time. So, but they mated with Homo sapiens. So, yeah.
I mean, to some degree, I can go with that, but I don't think we found any. I mean, I know there's the story of Zelf. I was hoping I didn't see Zelf in here.
No.
I thought for sure you were going to put Zelf in there, but you didn't.
I forgot to. Next edition.
So, for those who don't know the story of Zelf, tell us about the story of Zelf, and does that relate to your book in some way?
I know a little bit about it. I don't know Zelf very well, but it's a giant. They came across the ruins of a giant, and Joseph Smith said that this was one of the people in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, Lamanite general, I think he said. Or
yes.
Was it Nephite? I can't remember.
I think he's Lamanite. I think.
Yeah, I thought so too. Yeah.
So, yeah,
and that was supposed to be like 9 feet tall, but they never. The question is that an exaggeration?
Yeah, and I tie that in. So I say basically that the Nephites were probably related to this group of giants in my book From Egypt to Ohio. So Zelf actually ties in very well to basically the premise of that book, but I forgot to put him in there. So
okay,
second edition, third edition, I'll put him in there.
There you go. So you believe there were really giant, like 9 foot tall humans that lived in America and in the Old World and in the Bible?
Yes, I do, absolutely. So, yeah.
I bet a lot of people kind of scratch their heads when you say that.
Yeah. So that's where my academic credibility gets thrown out the window, kind of. But, there's a whole one of my favorite things to do, Rick, is traveling across America, across this beautiful country, and I visit I stop by various Native American mounds. I usually take my kids with me, kicking and screaming. They hate that, but a lot of the mounds, especially in the Midwest, there's a long history, there's a long tradition that they were built by a group of people known as the Mound Builders. And within Native American tradition and early European tradition, a lot of people made the argument that these mound builders were giants, and I think that they were onto something there. Now, people such as, my friend Greg Little, they will say, what we were considered, what do we consider to be giants? So in his book, The Nephilim Origins, the giants are between like 7 or 9 feet. But in any case, they're above average stature, and for your typical normal human being living in ancient times, they would have been considered gigantic and pretty scary.
Because I'm not familiar with any 9-foot skeletons that have been found. Are you?
Well, there's a guy who has a site, Giants of North America, and he gives newspaper clippings. One thing that's not very well known is that in the late 19th century, people started to find gigantic remains in various mounds across the United States, ranging from 7 to 9 feet. And there were newspaper clippings with photographs of these giants. Now, mainstream archaeology, mainstream academia kind of rejects a lot of these things because they say people could have, manufactured these photographs. These images could have been forged. Where are the remains? Well, a lot of the remains weren't really kept very well. They were fragile to begin with because they were in these mounds. They were in a bog-like environment. So the bones would deteriorate easily once you put them out in the air. And then a lot of the bones get sent to the Smithsonian, and they just disappear for one reason or another. So I won't go too much into that. People might call me a conspiracy theorist, which I guess I kind of am in some ways. But there is evidence. There are thousands of articles and newspaper clippings. Even some journals like Scientific American from the late 19th century that talk about findings of gigantic skeletons.
Okay. I guess you would acknowledge that mainstream science has a problem with these, but you think they're legit.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. All right. And I guess this kind of leads to, we've kind of been hinting, this pretty much makes you a Heartlander. Is that true?
Very much so. Yes. So
okay.
Definitely fall in the Heartland camp. I have many friends who are Mesoamerican in the Mesoamerican field. I guess most of my LDS friends are going to be in the Mesoamerican field, so I have many dear friends. But for me, the events of the Book of Mormon took place in North America, and those mound builders are for me synonymous with the Lamanites and Nephites here in North America. So I do a lot of stuff. So I write for Wayne May and John Lefgren. I do a lot of Heartland stuff. It's actually one of my favorite things to do. And interestingly enough, going back to my church tradition, this is one of the things where we've kind of shifted on. So if you look at an older version of the Record of the Nephites, we have a Mesoamerican map because I would say about 30 or 40 years ago, we very much held the Mesoamerican view similar to what the LDS Church holds. And that shifted. So we took that map in the recent publication, the Record of the Nephites, we took that map out. Now, we haven't put an North American map in yet, but I think the consensus among the quorum elders is that we agree that the Book of Mormon, the Record of the Nephites, the events in that book took place in North America.
So you're leaning towards making that Heartland an official church position. It's not currently, right?
It's not currently, but that's basically what most of us believe.
Okay. Well, I do want to get into your third book here, Relics of Babel. Do you say Babel or Babel?
I say Babel.
Okay. Relics of Babel, a reexamination of the Michigan relics. So tell us, what are the Michigan relics?
So the Michigan relics were found in the late 19th century, early 20th century. They have weird writing on them, and they portray a bunch of scenes that appear to parallel some of the biblical stories. And there's a whole controversy around them because this was the same time that these giant skeletons are popping up, and a lot of people, what mainstream academia, the kind of consensus that they come to is that these relics were hoaxes. And there's a dude named Scotford who found a lot of these relics, and it turns out that he was manufacturing a bunch of them. And he was trying to basically make money. His farm was going into foreclosure. He was trying to make money. And so because, if you tell one lie, people think that you've lied about everything. So because he manufactured some of these, you can kind of tell which ones he manufactured. They're really of low quality. But because he manufactured things, basically the public came to the conclusion that the Michigan relics were forgeries. Now, the problem with that is that we have relics that are similar to the Michigan relics that are basically classified as Michigan relics. Michigan relics all have something called a mystic symbol on them, which is 3 lines and then a slash line. And
is that on your cover?
Yes.
Try to get in there close. Okay.
See it? I think it's at the side. Yeah, it's at the top. At the very top, you'll see 3 lines and a dash. So,
okay.
So people assumed that these were hoaxes, but they were found in a variety of counties, and Scotford really didn't have anything to do with the relics that were in these counties. And so my book, I've looked at the Michigan relics up close. I've studied them. I got to touch them. Wayne May owns a lot of them, so I got to look at them. And basically what I kind of argue in my book is that many of these are not hoaxes, and that they correspond to the kind of history that we get with the Nephites and the Lamanites and their kind of origin, the origin that they claimed that they came from the ancient Near East. And that's why you have so much biblical imagery in these relics. So I fully acknowledge that people think that many of these are a hoax. Many of them were a hoax, but they were also, there were items with the mystic symbol on them found all throughout Michigan in various counties, and many of them, I believe, are authentic.
Okay, because I know one of the big things against them was, some of them are like clay pots or something. Is that right? I've not seen them, so I don't know what they look like.
Some of them are copper. So, copper. Yes.
Okay. Well, I know with some of the clay ones, they were they dissolve in water, and so they couldn't have been here for thousands of years.
And that's how people knew. Those were the ones that Scotford forged, and that's how people knew that they were forgeries. But there's others that are made of copper, that are made of much more durable material, that seem to be authentic. And we know, if you compare the Michigan relics, they don't seem to have been made by one person, which is what you would expect if Scotford was making all of these himself.
The first thought that comes to mind is Mark Hoffman. One of the problems with him was he would take a legitimate object, and then he would add, who was the lady, Betty Ross or Betsy Ross on the, sign it by them, and then it's worth more. And so the problem is you can take a legitimate object, but then once you get some funny business, like nobody will touch. If they know that Mark Hoffman had anything to do with it, then it's like, we can't trust this at all. And so it seems like a losing argument to say, well, he forged some stuff, but not others. It just taints everything, doesn't it?
And I agree with that. I mean, that's something that people who advocate for the Michigan relics, like I do, that's something that we have to deal with. I will say, Scotford and other places where the Michigan relics were found, there was no agenda here. They weren't. So we get a lot of things. One of the things, I'm blanking on the name of it. There were some plates that Joseph Smith thought were real, but they weren't.
Kinderhook plates.
The Kinderhook plates. So we get a lot of the stuff that pops up in the 19th century. But the thing with the Michigan relics is that they initially have no connection to any agenda. They don't seem to have been made, for example, by Mormons to prove that there were Israelites here pre-Columbus. Now, the Mormon Church eventually takes a stake in them. James Talmage, one of my favorite authors, he comes down and he actually looks at the relics, and then the relics actually end up being the property of BYU, which is, I think they're still property of BYU. So there is an eventual Mormon interest in them, but initially on the surface, when these items appear, there doesn't appear to be any agenda connected with them, which seems to me one of the things in evidence of their authenticity. Whereas with Mark Hoffman, his agenda was basically to destroy Mormonism, destroy the Restoration, and that's why the salamander thing and stuff like that. He does that to kind of discredit Mormonism.
Well, and I was trying to look because and the Kinderhook plates are a good example because it seems like those were made by anti-Mormons.
Yeah.
They were claiming the similar sort of thing. Hey, we just found this. And it was a trap for Joseph.
Yeah. So they weren't doing the same for Michigan relics.
Yeah. The next thing comes into my mind is how close is it to Beaver Island?
That's pretty far away, actually. That's Wisconsin, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, because James Strang had he said he had found some plates.
Well, yeah, and he found him in Wisconsin, and then he migrated to Beaver Island, Michigan, and he was the king of Beaver Island. And I just wonder, and he claimed to be a Mormon, so that people would definitely confuse Strang and Brigham Young, the same church as far as most people.
This was kind of around the Detroit area. I'm not sure how far that is. My geography is kind of off here from Beaver Island.
Okay, but the thought comes in that these are probably people who say, hey, the Mormons would be interested in that. And you said that BYU bought them. Of course Mormons are going to be interested in this, right? Yeah. But it seems like I was trying to look it up on Wikipedia. I thought James Talmage thought these were forgeries.
Yeah. Yes. And officially, I want to say BYU, I have a couple of friends who are archaeologists there. The official position, yes, they're forgeries. That's BYU's position on them.
Okay.
And they wrote a whole article on them saying that they were forgeries. That's a view I disagree with, but that's the position of BYU.
Okay, and so your position is some of them were forgeries, but some of them were not.
Yes.
I mean, because you also mentioned, because it was funny that you mentioned this, the James ossuary. Can you tell what that is?
Yeah, the James
ossuary.
It was an ossuary that had inscribed on it in Aramaic, Yaakov, Bar. Let me see. Wouldn't have been Bar. It's basically James, the brother of Jesus. I'm trying to think of the
son of Joseph and Mary.
Yeah. Written in really good Aramaic at the time, but then it turns out that it was later it was a hoax. It was a forgery.
Well, and what I understand, because there's a guy, Simcha Yakubovich.
The inscription was, I think.
Yeah, because basically there's a guy, Simcha Yakubovich. He did a film several years ago called The Jesus Tomb. And an ossuary is a stone box. Your longest bone in your body is your thigh bone. And so apparently in the first century, they would take, after a person's body decomposed, they'd come back a year later, they'd put all their bones in a stone box called an ossuary, and then it took up a lot less space. So they found 6 of these ossuaries, and one of them went missing on the black market. And then it sounds like somebody did kind of what Hoffman did, oh, I've got this. If I put James, brother of Jesus,
Yeah.
son of Joseph and Mary, it's going to make it worth a lot more.
It was a big deal. I remember I was in college when that finding came out, and the archaeological world was really, really excited about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But then people were like, no, it's a forgery. And so Simca's position is this was the missing box of the six. He still tries to make the case that this is the Jesus family tomb, but it just makes it a lot harder when somebody forges it like that to give it any credence. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a very, very big problem with the Michigan relics, and I would acknowledge that to anybody I talk to the relics about. So you lie once, it's very hard for people to take you to believe everything else you said wasn't a lie.
Right. So, all right. Well, have you got any other books out there?
Currently working on a couple of books. I want to update my perspectives on the Old Testament textbook. So working on a second edition of that. Working on another book now about Mulek, the son of Zedekiah, who's mentioned in the Book of Mormon. So preliminarily working on that. And hoping to take some time. My birthday's January 19th. So I'm hoping to take some time to work on that kind of as a birthday present to myself. So,
well, happy birthday!
In addition to what my wife and kids will do for me.
This will probably be coming out around then, I think. So,
oh, cool, awesome! Nice birthday present.
Yeah. Well, very cool. So your wife is still Catholic, is that right?
Yes. So, she's Catholicism is kind of in her blood. So, yeah.
Okay, and so your kids, are they Catholic Mormons?
They're
or
Catholic.
Mormon
They go to a Catholic school, but they know But it's so funny because they know everything about the Book of Mormon. I have Book of Mormon storybooks and stuff, so they know very much about the Restoration, and they'll tell. So my son Grayson one time said to the one of the religious teachers, after Christ rose from the dead, he went to America and visited the Nephites, and the religious teacher was like, "That's not Catholic doctrine, dude." So yeah, it was funny. I thought it was hilarious. So
yeah, you didn't get kicked out of school for saying that, though, huh?
Yeah. So I just want to keep on the down low. No, but I mean, we raise our kids. They're very knowledgeable of both our traditions. So.
Do you guys alternate weeks or anything? Or I guess it sounds like you don't even have a congregation, or do you?
I don't have a congregation here in New Jersey. When I was with the Community of Christ, I used to take the boys all the time to church services.
Okay.
So they knew about the Restoration and the Scriptures, Doctrine and Covenants, Book of Mormon very, very well.
Well, how is it to be an apostle who can't go to his own church?
I mean, I worship. It's funny because one of the things, we bash social media a lot, but one of the things I think it's done is made us, in some ways, a closer community. So I'll Zoom with some of the other churches in Independence and just hang out with them. So via Zoom. So even though I'm not with them in person, sometimes I do that to attend services. So back in the day, they used to send me when I was talking with Apostle Greenwell before he passed, he would send me cassette tapes of the services, and I would listen to those and stuff like that. But I also do Zoom conference from time to time with them. So even though there's not a church for me here in Jersey, I still interact with the churches that are in the Midwest.
Okay. Do you do a lot of traveling to Africa or anything like that?
I have not been to Africa. No, I have not been yet. I correspond with our African apostles. We have several apostles over there now. I correspond with them quite a bit. In fact, probably every couple of days. They're much better at keeping in touch with me than I am with them, but we do correspond. But I have not traveled to Africa, but I do plan on traveling other places. I'm hoping to go down to Alabama. I did not go with the other apostles, but I hope to go to Alabama sometime this year to visit our church community there.
And are you going to spend some time in Iowa at the Phoenician Museum?
Yes, I hope to go back there this year sometime.
Okay,
usually it's the first week of August, so if John will let me, I'll go back there.
Okay, so we need to coordinate. I would love to be there at the same time you were. I'll try to get Steve Pineacre to do it too.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So that would be fun because I definitely want to go. I was in Independence. I guess it was in September, and but I didn't make it up to the museum or anything. But
Yeah, that was when the John Whitmer. That's where the John Whitmer conference was, right?
right.
Yeah, I'm
So
sorry I missed it. I definitely want to go. So
what's in Texas in September? So save your money.
okay. Yeah, I was
And
supposed to present there one time, and it fell through because I don't think we had money for the plane ticket or something. This was like a couple of years back. I was supposed to present, and it just didn't work out.
oh, okay. I'm trying to remember. Is John Whitmer or is MHA in New York this year? I think it is.
That'd be nice. That'd be very convenient.
New York's a lot closer for you, right?
That'd be very convenient. That'd be sweet. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's in June. Should I double check that? MHA 2023 in Rochester, New York. So there's your reason to go to New
Okay.
York. That's in June.
All right.
Okay.
Sweet.
So you need to come.
Yeah. Yeah. I can definitely make that. So I usually go to Palmyra once a year. So that's not a problem.
Okay, June, you need to come. Okay.
5 hour drive. It's not bad at all. Yeah.
All right.
I can do that.
Okay, well, is there anything we've missed about you or your church or anything else you want to mention?
I think we touched on all the main points. We have a website. If you type in Church of Jesus Christ, the Assured Way of the Lord, I think it's johnthebaptist.info. Let me see. But we have a website for anybody who is interested. I should really know this as an apostle of the church. But we have a website for anybody who's interested in learning more about us. And we have digital copies of all of our scriptures, the Bible, the Record of the Nephites, and the Word of the Lord on that website.
Now, do you call it the Record of the Nephites because the LDS Church would sue you if you called it the Book of Mormon?
No, we call it the Record of Nephites. That's an interesting question. We get that from straight up from David Whitmer. So David Whitmer, he had the fallout with Sidney Rigdon and Joseph Smith. He goes to found his own church in the mid to late 1800s. Mormonism is kind of a pariah at that time. Nobody wants to be associated with that. So he, instead of calling it the Book of Mormon, he calls it the Nephite Record or the Record of the Nephites. When his church dissolves, there's a lot of people who go over to the Temple Lot Church, and those people, their descendants go over to the Fettingite Church and the Draves Church, so the Elijah Message tradition. So we get that kind of a weird, funky, roundabout way. We get that directly from David Whitmer.
Yeah, well, the 1830 edition is in public domain, so you can print it without worrying about getting sued, right?
Yes, which is good.
Yeah. My brother-in-law just gave me an 1840 edition. I'm like, what's the difference between 1840 and 1830? And I still don't know.
There's not. I know the whole white and delightsome gets changed to pure and delightsome, I think, in the 1840 edition.
Oh, okay.
Don't quote me on that. But yeah, I think there's like some subtle changes. And of course, the modalism, the Jesus as being the eternal Father, as being God the Father is taken out, and it's Son of the Father. Yes, johnthebaptist.info. If you go into that, that gives you information about our church. It even gives the church newsletter, The Greater Light, which I'd love to send to you, which we publish bi-monthly. And that newsletter always contains one of the messages and just what we're doing in the church.
Okay. Well, very cool. Very cool. Well, I think I'm out of questions now. So, looking forward to seeing you in June, maybe August in Iowa. And
Yes.
that would be awesome. So
That would be great. Yeah.
now, do you guys call yourselves elder? Should I call you Elder Adam Stokes?
Elder, yeah, elder's fine. I don't like the apostle term because I mean, I like it. I'm very blessed to be an apostle in my church. But I feel like if you go around saying that you're an apostle, and this is my Black Baptist tradition coming out. We have so many apostles in the Black Baptist tradition, and it's always like some dude who is wearing a Brooks Brothers suit and gold rings on his fingers and everything like that. So I prefer elder. So
Okay. So,
yeah.
Elder Adam Stokes from the Church of Jesus Christ, the Assured Way. Thank you so much for being on Gospel Tangents. I really appreciate it.
This has been an absolute pleasure. I love this conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Mm-hmm.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Elder Adam Stokes. Adam, thank you so much for sitting down with me. I'm still looking forward to meeting you hopefully this next summer, maybe out in Iowa, so we'll see. So thanks again for sending me those awesome books and for sitting down with me and talking about your church and your story. So I really appreciate it. In our next conversation, we're going to talk to Kyle Bashirs. He is a pastor for a Baptist church, believe it or not, but he's also a James Strang expert.
And he said, oh, you ought to look into Strang. And I said, what Strang?
Yeah.
Not who, what? What Strang? He said, James Strang. Because Dick had done some work on Strang. And he said, you need to get with a guy named Bill Shepard.
Yes.
And Bill Shepard is the historian, kind of archivist for the largest church that follows Strang to this day. And Bill, extremely kind man. Very warm, very inviting, very gentle. He literally gave me the idea for my dissertation topic, which was to look at the life of a man named Wingfield Scott Watson, who was one of the prominent leaders after James Strang died in that movement.
If you like what we're doing here on Gospel Tangents, please become a paid subscriber at gospeltangents.com or patreon.com/gospeltangents. We've got full transcripts on our website at gospeltangents.com. And if you'd like to check out some of our other conversations, click over here. Thanks.